Hello and welcome. I got this bottle of Glenfiddich here. Start off with a little of that. How's everyone doing today? Pretty good? Put that back in my pocket. So today we're going to talk about developing HIP APIs and applications using Spring Boot and Angular. My name is Matt RAIBLE. I'm an old-fashioned Java developer. Got my scotch. I grew up in the backwoods of Montana with no electricity and no running water. So I've been old-fashioned for quite some time. For 16 years I lived like that. I had to walk 1.5 miles to the bus stop every day, and it did feel like it was uphill both ways. And yes, that means we had an outhouse. We didn't have an indoor toilet. This is a picture of the cabin I grew up in. I was born in one corner. My sister was born in the other. I live in Denver, Colorado with my beautiful wife Trish and awesome kids Abby and Jack. And I also have a middle child. His name is Hefe. I bought him off eBay in 2004 and restored him over the last 10 years. And I always thought he was going to be done in 6 months. So it might be like similar software projects you've been on where all you need is 6 more months and it'll be done. And I guarantee my bus probably costs about as much as a really bad software project. So if you have a similar obsession with Volkswagens, particularly old ones like this one or Vanagons, I'd love to talk to you afterwards. So I work for a company called Octave. I'm a developer advocate, which basically means that I get paid to do stuff like this, which is awesome. I get to educate you about cool technologies, and I get to fly to places like Bulgaria, which I've never been before, having a great time here, love it. And developer DNA is the reason that Octave brought in Stormpath. I used to work for a Stormpath company that did authentication in the cloud. And basically what Octave found is they were more IT focused and they wanted to become more developer focused. So that's my role now, is helping them market and talk to developers and educate developers how to use our tools. And basically we offer authentication in the cloud. Whether you're using OAuth or OpenID Connect or SAML, we can make that happen for you. Makes it very easy to get to production without worrying about authentication, without worrying about your users getting hacked, because we keep those, we encrypt them. So now that you know a little bit about me, I'd like to learn a little bit more about you. How many people are Java developers? Okay, it's most of the room. Anyone consider themselves a web developer? Okay, that's about 5 or 10. How many people have been doing web development since like the mid-90s? Okay, we got a few of us, right? Anyone doing it like in the last 10 years? Just started in the last 10 years? Okay, a few more. And then anyone started in the last couple years? All right, well, happy to have you here. It's a good time to be a web developer, so welcome. Anyone likes JSF? We got 3. It's more than most. Anyone likes GWT, GWT? Yeah, that one used to be popular. We got 1. So JSF's beating GWT these days. Anyone like JavaScript? Low numbers. Usually it's about half the room. Today we got like 5. Anyone like TypeScript better? Just same number of hands. So we got a few more back there. So if you've been doing web development since, the late 90s, you've been doing it for more than 10 years, the question is, are you still hip? And my hypothesis is probably not. So if you want to be a hip Java developer, how do you do that? Well, the first thing you can do is actually use Java 8 with their parallel collections, the new date time API. You don't have to use the old Gregorian calendar. Functional interfaces with default methods, Lambda expressions, and even Nashorn on the JVM is a great way to become a little more hip. So let's define what a hipster is. A hipster is one who is exceptionally aware of or interested in the latest trends and tastes. So if you look at that, you might say, well, Java 8, that's kind of old. What about Java 9? Right? That just came out a few weeks ago. That's bleeding edge. That's not hip. It's got to become mainstream first. So it is possible to use Java 9 if you want. And with JHipster, I'll show you just a quick little thing about that. Here's a patch. If you look on gist.github.com/mrable, there's a patch for Gradle and for Maven. If you do want to use Java 9, you can. And then there's also this great blog post on migrating a Spring Boot application to Java 9. And so the short story is that basically Spring Boot 2.0 will fully embrace Java 9. If you want to use Spring Boot 1.5, you have to do a few tweaks to make it work. You can do it, but I don't know if I'd recommend it. Again, hip versus bleeding edge. So other trends in Java land, let's look at them. We have microservices, we have embedded app servers, we have environments, dev, test, and production, which actually made it as part of the Java EE spec. Auto configuration, that's one of the things that Spring Boot does really well, where it basically doesn't make you configure anything, you just add a dependency and boom, it works. And then monitoring, seeing what your application's doing. And there's also annotations, but annotations have been around forever. And they're better than XML hell, but it's still an annotation hell. If you're using annotations, you can get a whole bunch of them. So Spring has one of the best track records in Java land for hipness. They've never broken backwards compatibility. They've been around for 10 years, and they make it easy for you to jump from version to version. So that's pretty cool. Spring Boot automatically configures Spring whenever possible. It has metrics, health checks, no code generation, no XML, and then it embeds the app server. So getting started with Spring Boot is very easy. Start.spring.io. It's called Spring Initializer. You could even download and install it at your own company if you wanted. You can also access it via curl or HTTP IE if you wanted to do it from the command line, or even in some of the IDEs like IntelliJ, it has a way for you to select Spring Initializer and then select all the options in your IDE. So a Spring Boot API can be written in basically 20 lines of code. If it wasn't for all those getters and setters in Java, then it would be even less. So you could be super hip and do it in Kotlin. That's only 13 lines of code. And you don't even have getters and setters. You can see there that data class handles everything for you. So that's pretty hip as well. So according to GitHub stars, everyone is using Spring Boot. Sales of Spring Boot have skyrocketed, is what I like to say. You can also create a microservices architecture with Spring Boot. So you can have Spring Cloud Netflix provides the Eureka service, and then you have a circuit breaker with Hystrix, you have intelligent routing with Zool, and client-side load balancing with Ribbon. And so I wrote a blog post down there at the bottom. I'll make these slides available afterwards. You can read on how to do that. It doesn't involve anything from security or anything like that, but it does work pretty nicely. So I'm starting to feel pretty hip. Gotta put on some new shoes, and you notice I wore the skinny jeans for you. These things aren't that fun to wear. But they look good, right? And I got my Heroku socks on, so that's pretty hip. If you're a vendor and you're giving out swag at a conference, I highly recommend the socks over the t-shirts. Because I've gotten like 20 t-shirts in the last year. I've started to get like the smaller ones just so I can give them to my kids. So the latest trends in web development, one of them is progressive web applications, the ability for your actual web application to work offline and be installable. JavaScript MVC frameworks, totally hip, totally mainstream. CSS3 with animations, if you want to do some flashy stuff, you can. Mobile first development, which actually means testing it on your device or testing it on Chrome device toolbar and making it look like an iPhone 6 is the way you're developing, not starting with your big desktop. Front-end optimization, I've worked for many clients where I actually was able to reduce and speed up their basic, speed of their application by double just by optimizing the front end, concatenating files, and making gzip happen there. The funny thing is HTTP2 will actually make it so you don't need to combine all your JavaScript and CSS files anymore. So if you're looking at moving to HTTP2, you might want to consider that. And then REST APIs, everyone's using them with their client-side apps, whether it's mobile apps or something like an Angular app. So Angular is one of the hottest, if not the hottest, JavaScript MVC framework. And don't just take my word for it. There's this article from Eric Elliott back in December 2016, and basically he said React, Redux, Angular, and RxJS, those are the ones that you should actually study for 2017 and learn. And now some pretty graphs to prove my point. Jobs on Indeed.com. I don't think this is worldwide, I think this is US only, but I still think it's representative in most places. Angular, more people are hiring for Angular, and React. Stack Overflow tags, Angular has the most, React is catching up, which basically means that most people have problems with Angular and React, right? They're asking a lot of questions about it. GitHub stars, the surprising thing is with GitHub, everyone usually is a developer that's on GitHub. And so I think it's interesting to see that React and Vue have really taken off in the last year, and Angular hasn't had the star growth that those two have had. And so you see the fastest growing one's actually Vue. I attribute that to the fact that it's very small, it's like 20K or something like that, and it works well on mobile, and it's a paradigm that people understand. It's like programming a jQuery or AngularJS, not like Angular or React where it kind of takes over your whole app. So wouldn't it be hip if someone married Angular and Spring Boot? And what if they added Bootstrap? One of the most popular CSS frameworks. Well, Julian Dubois and his hip team did it. Hipster, baby. So now, this is like the hardest part of the presentation. Gotta take this one off, put the other one on. Yeah, baby. Then fold that down so it looks good. So do you notice what's super hip about Hipster? .tech domain. You don't see that much, right? That's a little mainstream, bleeding edge. So Hipster is basically a Yeoman generator, and you create a Spring Boot backend and an Angular frontend. And we're actually doing a fair amount of work on making it so Angular is not your only choice. React will be a choice in the next couple months. We're also working on mobile clients with React Native and Ionic. So Hipster is open source. As of last month, basically had 300,000 page views on jhipster.tech and 455,000 on GitHub. And you might think that the developers are the ones that are going to GitHub to look at stuff, but we don't view it that many times. So that's a whole lot of page views. 42,000 downloads, lots of GitHub stars. And the thing that I really like about it is the contributors. There's contributors from all around the world. It's not really owned by any particular company. EPON, the company that Julian works for, does sponsor trainees to learn how to code with Hipster and add features, so that's great. But otherwise, it's very much an open source project, and you can't even buy support for it. Now, if you do want to buy support for it, I'll sell you a license. Maybe like 10 grand, we can work something out, you know? And then I'll respond to your emails. So it has a number of policies with the project that I think are important to recognize. Policy 0 is policies are voted on by the development team. Pretty straightforward. Policy 1 is technologies used by Hipster have their default configuration used as much as possible. So we don't really try to tweak things and make them better if the default configuration is good enough. Policy 2 is we only add options where there is sufficient value add. Policy 3, for the Java code, we like IntelliJ, we follow their conventions. If you want to use your curly brace and put it on the next line, sorry, we're going to reject that pull request. And then policy 4, which is probably the best one, is use strict versions for third-party dependencies. This is especially important when you're doing any Node development or Angular development or React development. Lock down those versions. Don't use ranges. If you use ranges, it's going to bite you because someone's going to release a library that doesn't conform to semantic versioning and it's going to bust your build. So lock down those versions. That works really well. So foundational frameworks in Hipster: Spring Boot, Spring Security, Angular, AngularJS, Bootstrap, and then metrics from the Drop Wizard project. There's also Spring Data JPA, MongoDB, and Cassandra if you want to use NoSQL. You can also do caching with DHCache or Hazelcast. Elasticsearch is a nice feature that you can add in. Maven or Gradle, and a number of different authentication types. Cookie-based, basically traditional session authentication. JOT, JWTs, and OAuth 2, and then you can use Gulp or Webpack. And basically, if you use an AngularJS, you use Gulp. If you use an Angular, you use Webpack. And so to use Hipster, you install it, npm install, and yo is Yeoman. That's the command line tool for generating an app. What a great name for a command line. Yo, create me an app. I love it. So then you make a directory and cd into it. And this is something I always tell people because I think when you're doing Java development, you expect like a Maven archetype to create the directory for you and then put the files in it. Well, with Yeoman, it doesn't do that. So the first time you try it, you might do it in your home directory, and it's got a bunch of dot files that it creates as part of the project, and just puts that all in your home directory, and you're like, no! Why did that happen? So make sure and create a directory, CD into it, and then run it. YoJ Hipster. And that's the power of Yeoman. And so what I'd like to do now is to show you a demo of using JHipster. I'm going to generate a basic blog application, pretty simple, and then we'll look at its files and configuration. We'll generate some CRUD entities, a blog, an entry, and tags, and then we'll do some security limitations so people can only see their own blogs and their own entries, and then we'll deploy it to the cloud. And hopefully we can get that done in 20 minutes. With conference Wi-Fi, you never know. So the entity diagram that we're going to create, JHipster ships with the user. It already has that information in the database and in the entity relationship. So we're going to create a blog, we're going to create an entry, and we're going to create a tag. Oh, and I forgot to mention, I have a bunch of t-shirts and books. So I encourage you to ask questions, and then I throw you a t-shirt. So if you have any questions, now's the time. I don't know if I'll throw books. No, none yet? Okay. So before I begin, I also want to mention that the demo I'm showing today is using code that was released last night. And that's from a new refactoring I did in JHipster. Its OAuth 2 support up until this point has basically been its own embedded OAuth server supported by Spring Security, and then the client, which was in Angular, doing the communication to the server. And what I noticed when I did a code review on that code was that the client, AngularJS, actually had the client ID and the client secret in it. And so that's kind of a no-no when you're doing any OAuth stuff, especially in single-page apps. So I talked to the team and I was like, I want to add OpenID Connect support and make it a little more robust, and they were like, go for it. There's been a lot of demand for Keepo support, which is an OpenID Connect provider that you can download and use locally. And so I did that over the last month, got released last night. And basically OpenID Connect is very similar to OAuth, except for that step number 5 there. That basically is a user info endpoint. OAuth 2.0 itself doesn't have that, and what a lot of people did is they added a /me endpoint. Facebook, Google, a bunch of other folks did that, and that works, but it's not standard. So with OpenID Connect, they add that other one, and you can get what they call an ID token from the server, and that's got all your user information in it. So the reason I mention that is my company, Octave. We have free accounts for developers, 7,000 active monthly users, 10 custom apps for free. So let's get to the code. These things are fogging up because it's a little warm up here, so I'll take those off for now. So I created this beforehand because I've learned to not trust conference Wi-Fi. So I want to show you, I did this from my hotel just this afternoon at 2:17 p.m. I made the directory, I CD'd into it, and then I answered all these questions. So I'll go through and show you the choices. I just want to kind of show what this is, and basically at the bottom you can see it took 16. Oh, sorry. Forgot to mirror the screen. I usually get questions about that earlier. You guys are supposed to just yell, RAIBLE, can't see it. Now I gotta get the mouse over there, and then arrangement, and then mirror. There we go. Okay. So, you didn't want to sit around for 14 minutes as I actually generated the application, right? So that's why I did it beforehand, but I want to show you what it looks like. So, we'll just make a directory here. And we'll make it a little bit bigger there, so everyone can see it. And we'll call it J2Days. And we'll CD into it. And you're on YoJ Hipster. Okay, so you can choose whether you want to do a monolith or whether you want to do microservices or even a user access and authorization service. So that's a separate like OAuth 2 server. It's pretty much your own identity provider. I'm just going to do a monolith here. Base name, we'll call it J2Days. And then it remembers the last time I typed in a package name, so that's why it's got com Octa developer there. you want to use JHipster Registry, JHipster Registry is a Eureka server that we customize to have JHipster's UI, and then it basically can monitor and scale your application, but I'm not going to use it in this example. Type of authentication, I'm going to use the new stuff. Works with Keepo and Octave. SQL database, and I like Postgres, so we use that for production. For development, H2 with disk-based persistence. You can use in-memory persistence, but that means every time you restart your app, data's gone, which can be painful. Hcache I'll use, and then Maven or Gradle. How many people want Maven? It's like half the room. Any Gradle fans? Sorry, Maven wins. How many people use Maven? Same hands. Use Ant? You should have to drink this whiskey here. So we'll choose Maven. We're not going to choose any other options. Basically, the reason when you choose OAuth, it doesn't give you an AngularJS support, because I didn't feel like creating that. I consider AngularJS a legacy technology, and I just wanted to focus on the latest and greatest stuff, so it just gives you Angular 4 right here. You can choose whether you want to use Sass or not. If you're doing CSS, I'm going to say just the default's no. Internationalization, you can say yes, English, and then you'll notice there's no Bulgarian, so if anyone wants to contribute, there's a good way to do it. I'll just choose French here, and then protractor, so you can verify that everything's up and running. And then it prompts you, would you like to install other generators from the JHipster Marketplace? So the Marketplace has a number of other modules that you can use, and there'll eventually probably be an Ionic one. I was going to make the OIDC one into a module, but we decided to just roll it right into the main generator, so I'm going to say no there. And then it goes off and creates all that. So I'm not going to actually do that because it's going to take a while, but if we look at the file, yorc.json, it's got all the information in there, so you can see the package name, the language, the JHipster version, and basically all the answers to our questions, right, is in there. So if I switch to this one, and we look at that one, you can see that they're all very similar. Authentication type is OAuth 2, hibernates EHCache, Postgres. So we made all the same choices. I gambled on Gradle versus Maven, and it worked. At Java 1, Maven won as well. Last week at the Denver Java user group, Gradle won. So just to let you know, people's preference changes depending on where you go. So if we look at this, I'm just going to start it up with MVN. And then I have it up here in IntelliJ. And so you can see it generates a whole lot of Java code for you. But the beauty of it is it's using Spring Data and it's using Spring MVC for the REST endpoints. And so Spring Data does a very good job of having CRUD repositories for you, so you don't have to write a lot of code to do create, read, update, delete on your entities. Now the problem is with JavaScript you do. You still have to go in there and create HTML pages and controllers or components are called in Angular with TypeScript. So just to show you the basic structure, under config, there's the security configuration, for instance, for Spring security. There's also Timeleaf. We used it just for email. We don't render any server-side templates, but that's not stopping you from doing that yourself. There's a web configurator for Spring MVC. There's Jackson configuration. There's all kinds of stuff in here. And then if we looked at the repository, there's one for the user. So just finding the basic user information. And then the REST endpoints, there's one for account, which basically allows you to see if a person is authenticated as well as get the current user information. There's auditing. There's users to actually get the users. And so with OAuth 2 and OIDC support, we actually don't allow you to update the user within JHipster. But when the user logs in, we grab that information from the identity provider and sync it with the user in the database. What that allows you to do is have actually relationships to a user object, even though it's kind of a dummy object. It's still in your database and you can have relationships to it. So I thought that was important when I coded. So then this is a major, Spring Boot like starter, class that you'll use. We just add a little more information and print out, the ports that you're using and how to access that. So back here it's running. I can log in, and if you try to log in, this is what's going to happen to you. You're going to be like, what? I'm using the OAuth 2 support. It's supposed to just work, right? One of the things we pride ourselves on with JHipster is everything just works. So with OAuth 2, you do have to have a provider up and running. So I do have to start Keycloak. So I can go into Java 2 days and run docker compose, source main docker. So once I start that, it'll actually start up Keycloak on port 9080, the one we just tried to go to, and it'll have everything pre-configured. It'll have an admin group, it'll have a user group, it'll have an admin user, a user, and it'll also set up what they call a realm for JHipster and configure it so your client ID and your client secret are already hard-coded so you can easily code those into the app. So we've already set up all that for you, so once you start Keycloak, it's up and running and you can log in. So now we're logged in as admin. We have access to all the admin functionality. You can see all the metrics that we capture. You can also look at things like the help, the disk space in the database. You can see auditing, so you're logged in. You could actually go into the logs and tweak the logs, so we use logback. And so if you want to change, org Spring Framework to be, info, then you just click that and it actually happens on the fly. So the console will now start logging info. And then there's also a Swagger API you can use. You can go ahead and click those if you want, try it out, and see the data that comes back. So that all works. Now what I want to do is actually create a blog application, right? So there's this blog.jh, which is basically a theme or a JDL file. So JDL Studio is available here, jhipster.tech/JDL Studio. And what this allows you to do is it's an editor that you can modify, and it'll tell you when things are wrong. And since the last one I modified in here was the blog schema, it actually retained that in local storage. So if I visit the site again, it's there. And basically I can click download right here and download it. So we have a blog, we have an entry, and then it describes the relationships here, many to one, blog user to user. And then this is the user object and the actual property inside the user that'll show up in a dropdown. And then we want to add pagination for the entry and the tags, but not for blogs, because we don't expect to have that many. So now you can go here and you can say, yo, JHipster, import JDL, downloads, and it'll create all those entities for us. Now it does use Liquibase. So Liquibase is a way of migrating your data, but not only that, it creates tables for you, and it'll populate it with default data. So that's what JHipster uses. So here they're prompting us to override the master.xml because we're adding some new tables. So you say A for yes, which is all, but that's the only one it really overwrites. I think it overwrites a couple more for I18N and stuff like that. And then it basically runs the Webpack build, because this is the biggest difference between JHipster 1, or not JHipster 1, but AngularJS and Angular. With AngularJS, you can modify files and refresh your browser, and they're there. With Angular and TypeScript, you always have to compile. So if you change any code, you create new screens for the front end, you're going to have to compile that. So we run the Webpack build for you, and you can see that only took about a minute. But if you were on a faster connection, it would obviously be faster. So now we'll start everything from within IntelliJ. Just so we can see like the console happening. Because we are using Spring Boot DevTools, that's included by default, and DevTools allows you, when you actually have a project, if you recompile a class, it'll restart the whole application for you. So if you're on a fast Linux box, it happens in like 3 seconds. These Mac Pros aren't that fast anymore, so it takes like 10 seconds. But yeah, when I did this with Josh Long and his Linux laptop, man, it's fast. So one of the things I do want to do here is I'm going to go into the compiler settings and make it like Eclipse, where if I click save, it's going to build the project automatically. And so now everything's up and running here. And we can go look at what we have. So we're logged in. We have the blog. We can say, okay, let's create an admin's blog. And you can see the users are in that list there. So it handles all that relationship for you. We'll create one for users. and we'll create a couple entries. We'll say the obligatory first post. And that started yesterday, about 5 p.m. when I arrived. Put that in the admins, and then create one for user. We'll say flight was long, but fun, because you know what? I was on a Dreamliner. Dreamliner, baby. It's one of those new Boeing like 787s or something. So that was on Monday. Started at like 3 p.m. Put that in the user's blog. So if you look here, we have blogs and we have entries, but they're not segmented, right? Everyone can see everything, so you don't really want that. So we'll go into our blog resource and get all blogs. We'll change that to find by user's current user. So because I created a many-to-one relationship from blog to user, it was smart enough, Hipster was smart enough to create this blog repository that has that method in there already. So if I go back here, you'll notice it's already restarted everything, right? Because it's I changed that. So now if I refresh this one, yeah, that's a glitch. So that might be a bug, but it works. What's supposed to happen is it's supposed to go right back to that page, right? So something's not quite right there. But you'll see now we're limited on that, but if we go to entries, we still see everyone. So entry resource, same thing, we need to go into get all entries. And this one we're gonna do find by blog user login order by date descending. So this is Spring Data JPA. It's smart enough to know that something like that should turn into an HQL query, and it should find, you know, by the user dot login property and order by date descending. Well, we need to pass that information in, so there's a security utils that we can use with the get current user login, and then we have to go here and say IntelliJ, create me a method. So it's smart enough to go and create that method for you. And then you go back here, and now everything should work. But you notice DevTools has restarted a couple times. It doesn't always pick up all the changes, so this doesn't always work. See if it does. Now it goes back to the beginning, and then we go here. No, so this is when you have to restart it. So DevTools is great most of the time, but every once in a while, you know, it doesn't do things like you quite expect it to. Questions? Free T-shirts? Yeah. Does JHipster support Spock test framework? So there's no reason it couldn't, but it doesn't include it by default. Would you like large, extra large, or a book? A book? Okay, so the book is not on JHipster. It's OAuth 2.0 simplified. Equally good, but we didn't have time to print the JHipster book for this conference. I'll have some at DevOps though. So now we should be able to go back here and refresh. And it takes us to the beginning again, but if we go to entries, there's only one in there, right? It filtered out the user entry. So that's working well. One of the nice features is we have browser sync built in. Has anyone not heard of browser sync? That's a web developer. Okay, I don't see any hands. So browser sync basically refreshes your browser for you. You can use it with Chrome, Firefox at the same time, in Safari, even an emulator, like iOS emulator, and it basically refreshes all those whenever you change any code on the front end. So that's a great feature that JHipster includes, and it's really nice from a web development perspective that you can just tweak files and, you know, refreshes the browser for you. It'll also encourage you not to write tests for your UI. 76% of JavaScript developers do not write tests for their UI, so you'll be right with those folks. But you can still write tests, and Angular has a great testing framework, and JHipster supports that, so you should use it if you can. So now we'll go into an entry, and we'll say something like, it's a blog post, so Java 2 days rocks. You should be able to put some HTML in there. You'll notice it's escaped, so we need to fix that. So that's in the entry component. If you go down here, you'll see entry content right there. We can take that out. This is a little easier than in Angular 1. In Angular 1, you had to actually add a sanitize library, but here you don't have to. So that's going to restart everything for us. And now you can see we have HTML in there, but it still doesn't really look like a blog. So we can do better than that. We can take this whole div right here and replace it with jhip, this one. And so you might be like, how can you code that fast? Well, these are just shortcuts called live templates from IntelliJ. So I pre-recorded them, and then it's easy for me to just call them up with a simple shortcut there. So now if we go back here, it looks like an actual blog, and you can edit this and say rocks on, and it'll update it, everything works. So now, that's one thing. But what if you want to switch to Octa? So I have the cool thing is this is all Spring Security. There's nothing specific about like Keycloak or Octa or anything like that in here. I have this local file called Octa env, and these are all Spring Security properties for access token URI, user authorization URI, user info, token info, client ID, and client secret. So I did the hard part and set this up on Octa already, so you don't have to watch me click through a UI. And if I stop and restart it, it should pick up those environment variables. I don't know if it will because that was in a separate terminal, but we'll see how smart IntelliJ is. Yeah. So you're saying don't generate code for me. So what JHipster allows, it has an entity generator, right? That's what the import JDL is. There's also JHipster:"entity, and it prompts you with questions. That is purely up to you if you want to use that. You don't have to. But what it does is it generates all the code for you. There's about 15,000 lines of code between the Java and the JavaScript or TypeScript. That's all yours, right? Just because you generate it with JHipster, you own that code. It's all in your project, and you can modify it as you see fit. Well, it doesn't generate anything at runtime. It's all code, right? So it's not generating anything except what you tell it to generate. And then the really cool thing is it has what's called an entity or an upgrade subgenerator. So even though we're doing releases every couple weeks, you can run JHipster upgrade, and it'll actually do, as long as you're in Git and you have everything in Git, it'll do an upgrade for you, and it only changes what's changed between releases. And so what I told people for the longest time is generate a JHipster app, and then just treat it like any old app, where you upgrade the dependencies in Maven, and you upgrade them in Angular, and it's yours. We don't really own it from that point, it's on you. But the upgrade subgenerators kind of solve that, where people can actually still upgrade between. And sometimes it doesn't work, right? We break things between releases and it doesn't work, but you can actually use a diff tool like Smart Synchronize and just create a new project, have your old project, and diff them. It takes like an hour, to figure out all the files, but make sure and exclude node modules because you don't want to compare that. And then look at the rest of them, and it's usually pretty easy to upgrade. So now, after switching to Octa and running those environment variables, you'll see here I can click sign in, and instead of going to Keycloak, it goes to Octa. But I'm already logged in, so you didn't even see anything, right? And so if I went to dev my Octa instance, and then logged out, then when I come back to JHipster, okay, let's try it again. And this is something important when you do any security testing with something like JHipster, Incognito window, right? Because that destroys or doesn't recognize all those cookies. But you can see here, then we can log in, and it gives an Octa. So I can do demo at octa.com, just do users that I have in my account. And it logs in with that. This is not an admin user, but it comes back with role user, and then you don't see any admin menus. So that's pretty cool. But even cooler, let's deploy it to the cloud. So yo, JHipster, and you can do Heroku. How many people like Heroku? We got like 3. Cloud Foundry? None. I'm gonna go Cloud Foundry because I know that works. They both work. The one thing that does happen with Heroku sometimes is by default they give you like 400 megs of heap space, and you know Java's a little memory hungry, and so it takes a little more than that sometimes. It doesn't start on the first time. So Cloud Foundry works better because they give you a gig. So I'm just going to choose Java 2 days as the name. We're going to do the prod profile. And the reason I chose Postgres wasn't because I like Postgres, although I do, it's my favorite one. But Cloud Foundry only supports Postgres, so if I choose MySQL, the demo would fail right here. So I already logged into Cloud Foundry, that's why you didn't see any prompts there. But this is going to take a while. I think the last time I did it took like 6 minutes. So this will deploy, but it's still got like the settings for Keepo. So once it deploys, I'm going to have to go in there and change some things. I've cooled down a little so I can put these back on. So just to show you, this demo is available online. It's also written out if you actually want to copy and paste the code on that GitHub URL at the top there. And then the YouTube video has done very well this year, over 75,000 views since February, so that's pretty cool. But Hipster also supports the microservices architecture. Just going to unmirror my display here. So many of the things we talked about as far as Eureka, and you can also use HashiCorp's console, which just came out with 1.0. But basically you have Zool in the front, and it does the forwarding to your microservices, so you can have one-to-many microservices, and then all your Angular code will sit on what's called a gateway, and that'll proxy the request to the backend. There's also Hipster console, which uses Elasticstash, or the Elastic Stack for Logstash and Kibana. It used to be called Elk. They've renamed it to Elasticstack, and so we've got a few different options there. And like I said, we also have that UAA server that you can use for your microservices architecture. And the OAuth support is in beta for microservices. Works well for monoliths, but microservices, we're still working out some kinks. But more than anything, Hipster is knowledge. So it's got all of this source code in it that shows you how to integrate Angular with Spring Boot and Spring Security, and how to do CSRF tokens, and how to manage all that and manage the state between them. So even if you don't use it on a project, I encourage you to dig into the source code and check it out and just see how they're doing stuff. And it's Apache licensed, so you can copy and paste. Works great. So the Hipster mini book is something that I wrote a few years ago. I used to be a consultant for 20 years, and I would work with clients either doing Angular or doing Spring Boot. And what I found was that Hipster kind of encapsulated a lot of that, so as an independent consultant, I wanted to market myself a bit more. So I talked to InfoQ, I was writing some articles for them, and I said, hey, how about I write a mini book? And they said, great. Why don't you start your Word doc or your Google doc and then send this to us when you're ready? And I was like, no, I want to use ASCII Doctor. And so when I started it with ASCII Doctor, they were like very hesitant, and they thought it would be the most expensive book that they ever produced. Because they basically guessed that we would have to take the PDF that I outputted from ASCII Doctor and reformat into their PDF format. But ASCII Doctor does all that for you. It creates a PDF, it creates a MOBI file, it creates an EPUB file, and it has all those for the different devices. So worked out great. It was the cheapest book they've ever created, and we've got the 3rd edition out now. It's only been out for a couple weeks. So I developed a real-world app called 21 Points, and I used it similar to how Spring Boot tracks its health. I tracked my health with it. So the idea behind 21 Points is you get 21 possible points in a week. And the reason I did this is because I had done a no-sugar diet. It was my wife's idea, and on Monday I found out when we started it that no beer was allowed. I was like, oh man, it's gonna be a rough 21 days. So 21 days, no beer, no sugars, and just being really good about health. Not so much, encouraging exercise, but whatever, eat right. And so I did it, and for 20 years of my life, since my early 20s, I've had high blood pressure. In the sense that when I went to a doctor, and like when I was 23 out of college, they said, you're probably gonna have a heart attack and die before you're 35. They didn't say die, right? I mean, heart attacks happen, people live. But anyway, it was like, okay, I should do something about this. I didn't really do anything about it until about 5 years ago. I went and got high blood pressure medication, I started taking it, blood pressure went down, but during this 21-day sugar detox, the first week I ran out of blood pressure medication. I went to my pharmacy, asked for more, and they said, you gotta go talk to your diet, or your doctor, and I was like, I don't want to deal with that, I'll just wait until this detox is over and then I'll do it. At the end of the detox, my blood pressure was fine, for one of the first times in my whole life. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna start tracking this. So 21 points, you get a point a day, So you get 3 points a day, right? 21 in a week. You get a point if you drink responsibly. So that was a caveat that I added. I have my own rules, which basically means like a glass of red wine, maybe a Greyhound, you know, some clear liquids, not beer. And then you get a point if you exercise, and you get a point if you eat no sugar. It might be different for you. Maybe you don't like high fats or whatever. But what I found is if I get 15 points in a week, I usually maintain, you know, my level of fitness, my weight and everything. If I get 18 points, I'll lose weight. If I get 10 points, I'll get sick. So I've stopped blaming my kids for bringing colds home from school because I know it's my fault now. It's not their fault. And so I get sick much less. It's a great app. You can use it as well. And it's been recently upgraded to Angular 4. It's on GitHub. It's not deployed to 21points.com because the AngularJS one still works. But I will do that soon. So you can download that from InfoQ. And hipsters like beer. So I found this one. It's called Glarus. It says craft beer. It's a local beer. So cheers. So the lines of code in 21 points. JHipster generated 15,000 lines of code for me. I generated the entities to do the points and everything like that, and basically added 6 more thousand lines of code. And then for me to tweak it to actually look like I want it to look with graphs of my weight and of my blood pressure and of my points, I only had to add about 1,500 lines of code. So great way, great use of JHipster. So you can learn more about JHipster on Twitter, on its website, Generator JHipster on GitHub. Like I said, I have a couple of YouTube videos out there for JHipster 4 that I recorded in January, the blog demo, and then microservices, Google Cloud, and Kubernetes. That's also available. If you need help, if you enter an issue on GitHub and you ask a question, chances are we're going to shut you down pretty quickly. We have recorded templates that basically say, go to Stack Overflow, you know, don't ask questions here, because we want to keep it for issues, for problems that people have. So please enter it on Stack Overflow. We get the same notifications right away, so people will be answering it there. We also have a chat room on GitterIM if you're interested there. If you want to contribute, we need Bulgarian as a language. That'd be great. There's also the JHipster dev mailing list. And what's new and next, we have start.jhipster.tech, similar to start.spring.io. It actually creates a project for you and checks it into GitHub. So instead of doing anything locally, you can do it online, you can do it on your phone. There's JHipster Registry 3, and what we're doing there is we're trying to take the admin part of JHipster and put that into the actual registry, and then you don't have to admin in each of your applications, you can do it from the registry. React support is coming hopefully in time for DevOps. I have a talk with Deepu, the co-lead and mainly the UI guy of JHipster on Angular versus React. Smackdown. So I think I got him, but we haven't created the presentation yet, so we'll see. And then obviously the WAP2 and OIDC support we just added. If you want to learn more about like what Julian's thinking of, the leader of the project, there's a link to his recent presentation at the bottom. I write lots on the Octa developer blog. On Spring Boot and Angular. Sometimes it has Octa in it, a lot of times it doesn't. So if you want to learn more, go there. But let's see how our application's doing. This is where I need to remember to mirror, or you guys will be like, what's he talking about? So look at that, it worked. It took about 4 minutes, 53 seconds. So if we click on that, it goes there, but remember it's going to try to go to Keycloak. So I have this script here. And it basically sets all the environment variables for Octa, for Cloud Foundry, and we're just going to call it Java 2 Days as the name of our app. And so it's going to set all those variables, and then it's going to ask you to restage. And the restage takes about a minute, so I'll go back to the presentation after I run that. So what I invite you to do is take action. Try Spring Boot if you haven't already. Try Angular. Try JHipster. If nothing else, it's pretty cool to create an app, you know, with all this functionality and have that CRUD stuff in under 10 minutes. And look at progressive web applications. So JHipster does have support for progressive web applications. If you look at the README that's generated with your project, not only does it have instructions for setting up, you know, your application on Keycloak and Octa, but it also has information on progressive web apps that basically involves you going in and commenting out a few lines of code. in the main index.html, you have to register a service worker, and then in a Webpack configuration, you have to copy that service worker file into the dist directory. And enjoy the experience. I mean, it's fun. So if you have any questions, obviously I have about 5 t-shirts left and a couple books and a whole bunch of Hipster stickers. So I'm not going to make you answer questions or ask questions for the Hipster stickers. I'll give those out. I'll just set them up here. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask in front of everyone or come up to me afterwards and ask. But let's check on this deployment here and see how that's going. So while that's going, any questions? One in the back. Can I have a free t-shirt? It's an excellent question. I have large and extra large, and 1 ladies. So I think this one's yours. I can try to throw it to you. Ready? Second question. Can he get his t-shirt for his first question? L or XL? XL? You're welcome. Anyone else? A walk book. T-shirt. You want the socks, don't you? You already asked one. Yeah. No. I like the, can I get a t-shirt? I've had that more and more lately. But hey, this is running now, so let's try it. You see it redirected for us. It goes to Okta for us. And it's logged in, since I already logged into Okta. So this is one thing that people do have a problem with, and we've already had a bug logged, is, hey, I can't log out and log back in as user. You can log out, right? And you are logged out. You refresh, you're logged out. But if you sign in again, it doesn't prompt you to log in again. The reason for that is we're an identity provider. Okta's an identity provider. Facebook is an identity provider, right? If you go into an app that you connect with Facebook, and then you log out of that app, the last thing you want it to do is log out of Facebook for you. You just want it to log out of that app. So we're kind of doing what the industry does, but I know Spring Security 5 has better OpenID Connect support, and chances are they'll allow you to say, hey, I want to log out of the IDP as well. So it can be frustrating when you're doing development with Hipster and you're used to logging in with admin, user, but think about it in your own life. You don't really log in with different accounts that much unless you use Google, and then you have like 5 different ones. But it's kind of the way things are right now. We can fix it, we're aware of it. So I think that's all I have. Contact information here, and t-shirts, stickers. I got business cards if anyone wants them. Thanks for coming.